All right, Miguel. So we have to know, what is the secret for writers to have a more authentic writing brand in 2024?
It's don't chase trends. No one's authentic
Okay.
writing voice has ever been made by chasing the pulse of the moment. It's be curious, be courageous, don't judge anything you write, don't chase trends.
Are there any specific trends or examples that you've seen where it's just not serving a lot of writers' interests?
Yeah, one of the big trends I've seen right now is it's a bit clickbaity. You see it on social media when somebody's like, here are the 9 things you are doing wrong. Here are the 4 things you are doing wrong. Whatever it is. That is a list of advice that's usually some permutation of the same advice everybody gives at the end of the day. And
Interesting.
yeah, it does nothing to help you go into and discover what your voice actually is as an author, what you actually believe as an artistic voice, and then how to give that to the world. So,
that's interesting because I see so many, whether they're artists, writers, or content creators, I see them starting out and building these videos or putting out these posts where they're trying to give advice, which is good, but they're not giving unique advice that hasn't been said before. And I think sometimes that can be a huge miss for new artists because they're like, hey, I want to help. These things they're helpful to me, but they've been said like literally a million times, like time and time again. Yeah, I could totally. I've seen that done a lot, and that makes me ask myself as a writer. I'm like, okay, so how do I put out information that hasn't been said before that still helps writers? Because if the information was helpful, then how come there's so many writers out there who still struggle with writing and getting their book published? So clearly, there's things that still need to be said, and I think that strategy is always interesting.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me is I think there's a mindset shift that's required as a writer, and I wouldn't say any artist, but it's quickly learn that art is actually not self-expression. Writing is not self-expression, it's self-discovery. And when you start to chase that,
not self-expression, it's self-discovery.
Yeah. It's finding out what you're thinking. It's finding out what you believe. And you could hear you hear Margaret Atwood or Stephen King talk about that. They're like, I sit down to write to find out what I'm thinking, right? It's an act of self-discovery. It takes courage. And once you get into that, you can get away from the egoic idea that, I created this, I invented this. I was like, no, you discovered it. Like you found this and then you shared it with the world, right? And therefore it's kind of hands off after that. Like whatever it does is whatever it does.
That's actually really interesting. I've never thought about framing it like that through it's almost like a mental health perspective of it's less about the artistic expression. It's more about like, how am I understanding myself to get to that artistic expression? Yeah.
This is where it comes back to, again, we've heard so many people talk about this before, but it's curiosity, not judgment, right? It's it's Shakespeare's negative capability, or at least what Keats called Shakespeare's negative capability. It's don't judge what you're writing, explore it. Don't judge the character you're writing, even though you're probably going to want to, if you're writing a dickhead or if you're messing around with some kind of villain. Like don't judge it. Instead, explore what that character's existence is actually like. What do they actually feel? What have they gone through? What have they not gone through? And when you do that absent judgment, extraordinary things start to happen, right? Because you're not telling anybody what to feel. You're not telling anybody what to see, what to understand in your story. Instead, somebody told me quite recently about something else entirely. They said, instead of trying to show people, why not just let them see? Right. And that's the difference, right? Instead of trying to show them the conclusions they should arrive at, just let them see and make their own and that sort of thing.
It makes me wonder if it's almost that the very common argument with writing of show versus tell. I wonder if it's borderlining that ideology.
It is.
Yeah, but first off, thank you for sharing that. I'm definitely going to want to hop more into that. But before we do, I want to welcome you to the Create Right Now podcast. This podcast is designed to help you, the unpublished writers of the world, with writing that book, giving you strategies, insights, and learnings from other authors and writing professionals. Welcome, I'm Kauffman. This is the Right Now community. I'm on a mission to help the unpublished writers of the world get their books written and finished through the process, the lifestyle, and the mindset that it takes to become an author. So come join the community, and we're starting right now. All right, beautiful. And if you're watching on the replay, we got you covered. At the end of the stream, the timestamps will be added so you can hop to the questions that really bring you the most value. All right, perfect. And then let me just welcome ML. Welcome to the stream. And Courtney, glad to have both of you in here. Excellent. Courtney, it looks like you're getting some good feedback on your stories. I am so glad. And for those of you who don't know, Courtney joined us last weekend and she got one of the first live coaching sessions that we did. And it sounds like Courtney's getting some good feedback on her book over on, I think it was on Wattpad, I believe, which is super awesome. Hey, welcome, Dana. Welcome to the stream, my friend. Thanks for hopping on. All right, perfect. So without further ado, let's hop into it. We're going to be chatting today about how do you build an authentic author brand? How do you be authentic in this day and age, especially when social media can lead us astray or it can help us? There are so many obstacles and pitfalls. What we're going to be chatting about is we're going to be talking about authentic author strategies. We'll be digging into something called value-aligned authenticity. We'll be talking about author brands and why the need for culture is important. And then we'll also be lastly diving into some strategies that you can use to be more authentic on social media and how you could drive your authentic author brand at live events, conferences, and book events. So stay tuned because we were going to be chatting about it all. And now without further ado, we're chatting with, I invited Miguel Eichelberger. He is a communicator, writer, culture, and leadership consultant, and an optimist, most importantly. He received his BA in English at the University of Calgary with concentrations in Archaeology and Theatre. He consults with organizations across Canada on leadership and culture, building for sustainable, people-first growth. He has written for leaders in the space as well as across a variety of scientific fields. His work as an author and ghostwriter has appeared in the Globe and Mail, the Hill Times, BC Business, and more. Because of his work with the UBC School of Biomedical Engineering, he was nominated for a 2022 UBC President Award for Innovation and Creativity in Communications. And so exciting, he's actually coming out. He is having his published chapbook, a series of poems. We'll get to dig into that shortly. That's actually going to be being released very, very soon. So let me introduce Miguel back to the stream. Welcome, Miguel.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Of course. I've been so impressed with the way that you go about communication authenticity. I believe when we first connected, we connected over Threads. And I remember when I saw your message, one of the first things, like I checked out your stuff. I'm like, authenticity. Yes, that's a win. You already had me at authenticity. And I'm like, I could tell we had maybe some value aligned authenticity perspectives.
Yes, absolutely. No, it's yeah, first of all, genuine thanks for being here. We talked about this briefly before. I dig this community. I dig what you're doing. And I think there is profound impact that can be had here. And yeah, connecting on authenticity is my jam. So just quickly, I want to lay in a definition of authenticity because it's been used so many different ways by so many different people. I really like Simon Sinek's definition, which is saying and doing what you actually believe. Of course, that requires the hard work of finding out what you actually believe, but that is my definition of authenticity.
Awesome. I think that's a really good starting place. Absolutely. Because sometimes I think definitions can get very jumbled. And I think trying to start with a firm groundwork is very, very important. So I think this is awesome because in building up this writing community for the past, it's been like 8 or 9 months. I know one of the things that writers always say is like, Kauffman, Jared, I come across very authentically, and I'm like, awesome, that's great. And my goal is to hopefully help a lot of writers who are authentically working on their own stuff, so that way they can be their best selves. They can tell their stories and then really help put their best stuff into the world. So I want to hop into how some of the strategies that we can use, some of the strategies that you use to really help authors just be more authentic in this day and age. And I know it's such a long conversation. It might actually be much longer than the hour of the podcast, but I feel confident we can hop into some of the key highlights. So starting off at the top, what would you say is your strategy as an author to be more authentic? Are there any specific strategies that have worked for you, or any strategies you've seen work very well for your clients?
Yeah. One of the most important things is changing one's relationship with the work itself when it comes to voice, right? So voice isn't one thing. It's not fully formed. It is something you literally find over the course of many iterations and many edits. So the first thing is just never settle for your first draft, because that's not your voice yet, right? That's just, getting the story out and that sort of thing.
Interesting. The first draft is not your voice.
It's not your voice.
I think I can agree with that, because I think the first draft's designed to just have fun, explore new things.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And so like the one of the best examples I can use is George Saunders. He talks about this in his A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, which, by the way, I recommend everybody read if you are a writer. It is a crash course in short fiction by one of the greatest doing it.
It's called what exactly? Give me the title and I'll drop it in the chat.
It's called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders.
Awesome. A Swim and a Pond in the Rain. Perfect.
And what he talks about is what voice actually is, which I really, really love. This frees a lot of writers when they encounter it. Is that voice is like, today you edit the version and maybe you're angry, or maybe you didn't eat enough, or maybe you didn't sleep enough last night. Tomorrow you are on cloud 9 and you edit it again and you make new decisions. And then the day after that you do the same thing, you do that, and eventually it's 20 different versions of you have decided what this thing should and could say. That's how you write characters that are smarter than yourself, and more importantly, that's how you really get to what your actual voice is. It's when every version of you, no matter how you show up, has sat down and weighed in on this sentence, this paragraph, this chapter, this plot point, whatever it is. Once you get to that point, you're like, now that is the closest you're going to get to the most authentic version of your voice in the editorial process. And what I like about this is you see it free people from the idea of having to be perfect on the first run, right? Because nobody is, and you.
Wait, no, nobody's perfect after their first draft.
Yeah, nobody's perfect after the first draft.
What about those? What about the pantsers out there? I'm pretty sure they're perfect after the first draft.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of my history of pants writing, because I thought it was going to be I was like, this is going to be the thing. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write 1,000 words a day, and I'm just going to do it. So I did it for a year. And what I did was I wrote a couple plays, and I wrote the first drafts to 2 different novels, right?
Okay.
The first one in particular is so bad. It is so bad. It is so disjointed and distraught and confused by what it wants to be and what it is that I haven't even looked at it since then, right? And that's years ago. The second one hangs together a little bit more, but still, like, the amount of work that would be required to do that would almost be like starting from scratch. So it's one of those things where had I only had a plan, you know what I mean? Even a minor plan, a little bit of a plan, we could have seen what happened in that space, right? But no shade to the pantsers. Like, if that's what you do, that's what you do. But yeah, now the allow for the plan, allow for iteration, and then you can get away from perfectionism.
Yes, it's interesting because I don't think perfectionism is one that I've dealt with myself, but I see so many writers are dealing with that. Like, they feel that the rough draft has to be like amazing, or they feel like it has to be perfect, or the characters have to be just right. And I'm like, you know how many drafts you're going to take until it's published, right?
Yeah, and the most successful commercial author of all time, Stephen King, in his On Writing, one of my favorite things he did. Like, the whole book is good.
Great book. I do like On Writing. Mm-hmm.
But the best thing he did was, at the end, he shows you his first draft. And then he shows you how he edits it and puts it like that. And I was like, that was the most freeing thing ever, because you see like the most successful writer of all time does it too. He makes the same mistakes. He screws up in the same ways, that kind of thing. You're like, oh, like I can make a first draft that's like kind of like that. Maybe like not as good as Stephen King, but I was like, I can make one that like makes that mistake and screws up in this way or whatever. Then of course the editing stuff coming afterwards, that's where you find voice.
So speaking of Stephen King, who's of course a prolific writer, and I'm curious if you're here in the stream right now, if you're a Stephen King fan or you've enjoyed any of his books, say I in the comments. But I'm curious, Miguel, why do you think Stephen King was such a successful has been such a successful author? Do you think there's any like one thing that you would say has defined his success?
Yeah, it's pursuit. It is dogged pursuit, and it's always based on curiosity. Like I remember he talks about this a lot, right? Like what he starts with isn't some big overarching idea. It's oftentimes like, okay, it's I have an idea of a character and I have an idea of another character, and they're standing in front of an iron gate in the middle of the woods, right? And then you go from there. And again, it's this sense of curious discovery. It's almost like an archaeology of the setting, right? Where he's digging into like, okay, what put these people here at this point in time, at this day, like whatever it is. And then he goes from there. But the whole point is he doesn't stop. It's dogged pursuit. It's the demands on his, I think he does 2,000 words a day, if I remember correctly, instead of 1,000 words a day. But it's that dogged pursuit that he does. And in so doing, like you first of all, he's a student of craft. He's a huge reader, right? And that stuff gets in as you go. But as one does, the more you do a thing, just simply the better you get at it. The more you learn to trust the instincts that come from here instead of the voices that come from here. The more you learn to just go and flow with what's happening, right?
Yeah, and I would have to say Dana threw up a really great comment here. Dana said his book Carrie he threw in the trash. His wife dug it out and helped him with it, so it got published. I've read that one. Carrie, absolutely a phenomenal read, or the movie was also done very well. But yes, very, very completely agreed with what you said, Miguel. And I know I can speak to just the consistency portion of it, of just being consistent, driving myself to just keep trying, right? I'm 260 days into this daily live stream writing process. And what I can say, and I say this all the time with the community, but of the 260 days that I sit down to write, I did not feel like writing every day. Of the 260 days, there were probably a good 40 days where I did not feel like writing when I started. And then through those 40 days, I would say 20 to 30 of them, I got inspired through the community or what I was writing. And there was probably roughly like 10, 15 days where I wrote and I felt like trash. And I'm like, that's fine. But it was still part of the process. And I felt proud because of that consistency. And I think a lot of authors realize that because book writing is a process. And then you write that first book, and then what happens next? Readers want more. Where's the rest of the series?
Yeah. And also this is what the one thing I can say about, like I saw somebody throw their hand up and say, I'm a pantser.
We had a couple pantsers in here.
Yeah.
I think we definitely have some pantsers. Yep.
Here's the one thing I can say about doing that though. The one gift of it, which is the first time even if you're just pantsing it and you don't know where you're going, but you end up with a finished product, like you write the end. The first time you write the end, even if it's a crappy draft that you know you're going to have to go back and dig through and prune and ruin, even if it's that, you slayed the dragon once. You did it, which means it can be done again, right? Like you have now given yourself permission to do this again, right? It's the Roger Bannister thing, the guy who ran like, was it the 4-minute mile or whatever, when everybody thought it couldn't happen, and then 12 people did it after that. It's that. It's like once you see that, it's like, oh, this is okay. I can do this. I can write one. You can write. You can write from there on.
Beautiful, awesome. I definitely wanted to go on the Stephen King vibe because he is such a prolific writer. So when we're thinking about the authenticity aspect of it, and we're thinking about, okay, so I'm a writer. I've been working on my book. Maybe I've been doing it myself, or maybe I have a writer's group. And now suddenly, how do I get people to buy the book? I have to go to book events eventually. I have to post on social media because social media is where attention is. And now I have to put myself out in front of people. And I think that the question that I see a lot of writers face is that they put themselves out, but they don't really know, maybe not how to be an authentic version of themselves, especially with social media. So I want to dig into the authenticity conversation to really help our writers come up with strategies to help them. And I think at the surface level, when I was researching, one of the key terms you said was you mentioned value aligned authenticity.
Yes.
What is that? What is value aligned authenticity, and why is that important to writers?
Ooh, I think it's one of the most important things, not just for writers, but for anybody really. So values aligned authenticity means, this goes back to doing and saying what you actually believe. So first you need to figure out what that is. Most of what you believe about yourself, about what you're trying to do in life, has been kind of accrued by accident based on, your parents, the society you came up in, the high school you went to, and whatever it is, right? It's trying to dig beneath all of that and find out, okay, what do I actually value? There's wonderful values exercises everywhere on the internet. I highly recommend every single person go out there and do it. If you find that you have more than 5 values, you probably don't. Almost all of those can fit underneath the banner of the first 5 or first 4 that you find. But go do a values exercise where you find out, like, these are the things that really matter to me. Another way to do it is when you go back to when you're a kid and dig through a couple of your very best moments where you were like, man, I could have done that my entire life. I could have forgot to eat about it. I just, everything would have been the best. I was me. I was killing it. Or even some of your worst moments. What you'll find is those 2 stories are the same story. And the theme between those 2 stories is going to tell you what you value. Anyways, once you have that value stack, then you have values aligned living. And so that is run your decisions through those values.
Interesting. So it's really, you're kind of exploring it through the themes of your stories, like central themes that you probably write to a lot, and then using that to understand what are the specific values that I care about, like bullet point list of values, and then speak to those values.
Exactly. And
I love that. Exploring it through your writing. That's awesome.
Yes. And as writers too, I guarantee each and every one of you, I know I do, you are a fan of some kind of author you encountered. Like, what was the first book that lit you up and you're like, holy shit, you can do this with writing? Like, you can make a person feel this?
Lord of the Rings.
Perfect. That's amazing. Okay, amazing, right? And when you do, and this is the thing, like Kauffman, your thing is fantasy, right? Like you're a fantasy, yeah, of course, right? So you go into that space and you start to unpack, okay, like, why did that sing to me? Why did that hit me in just such a way? Why did it open me up, right? And so your values are in that space. You do it either through what you love or through your writing. I actually recommend doing it through your writing, just because the more you start to tell your story is to start to discover your story, and to discover it is that's the best guidepost ever for how you want to show up in the world, how you want to talk about yourself, where you bring the most value to other people. Like, it's not, contrary to popular belief, it's not in anything else except being yourself and except telling your story. Like, one of the things that I recommend to everybody is show your mistakes. Like, you want to talk about showing up authentically, like, you can show the punchline, show the beautiful piece of work that you put together, right? But also show, like, oh, by the way, this is draft, 18, and this is, like, I made this mistake, like, I left this whole thing dangling here, plot hole here, whatever it is, right? Show your mistakes, like, show the actual process that gets to that beautiful punchline. And the reason why this is one of the most important things for me is the faster you can dispel the myth of the genius writer, the faster you can dispel that myth, then you realize that, like, that talent that doesn't work hard gets beaten every time, right? Working hard always beats talent that doesn't work hard. When you understand the mastery,
that consistency game,
mastery is the inevitable result of practice. It's not because this person's a genius and you can never do what they do, right? It's just practice, right? Once you can dispel that myth, then you, like, show your mistakes, do everything, show the work that got you there. Don't believe the punchline, right? The punchline's not perfect. It didn't come from a perfect space.
It's kind of that philosophy of focus on the journey, not the outcome.
Yes, right? Very much.
It's I think there's a word for it. It's like journey, or it's like process driven strategy or something like that.
Yeah.
But we actually have a really great comment in here. It sounds like one of our writers asked a really great question, which I wanted to throw up here. So, by the way, Jay, welcome to the stream, by the way. We're here with the Right Now community. We definitely have daily motivation if you ever need help. But I wanted to pose this question to you. So Jay said, I'm thinking about starting a blog because I tried Medium, and comparing my writing to professional writers on that site made me feel insecure. How should I start? What would your advice be to Jay?
Okay. Well, there's the hard answer to that, and then there's the what I would call the easier answer. So the hard answer is do it anyway. Okay. Do it anyway. The beauty of seeing work that you think is better than yours. This goes back to, okay, first of all, you're not in competition with anybody. You can dispel that right away, right? Instead, it's you against you. And when you see work that you really, really love that makes you feel a bit insecure, what it's doing is just kind of pointing out like, oh, I don't have this particular strength in my writing, right? But I might have this strength in my writing instead. And whereas I'm the kind of person who, I don't really believe in strengths and weaknesses anymore. I usually think that your strength, whatever it might be, is usually the flip side, or your weakness, whatever it is usually the flip side to a strength, right? So
yeah, a lot of times with strengths, weaknesses, you tend to see the same.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So my thing is do it anyway, because what really I see in this question, and it's a really good question, by the way, very vulnerable question, is the insecurity aspect of it. Like defeat that by putting your work out there. And if you get the negative feedback, if you get the positive feedback, then it comes back to your values, where you can create a filter where you can run all the feedback through. If it doesn't make it through the filter, it doesn't matter to you. But if it makes it through the filter of all the things that you value, right, then you're like, okay, that's valuable feedback and I can use it. Even if it comes from, a shitty human being. It's just one of those things where like my thing is just go for it anyway, right? If it's if it makes you feel insecure, it means you love it. It means you care. It means you actually want to do something good out in the world, right? So good, follow that.
I absolutely love that, Miguel. That was a great answer. I know, I see the comparison thing happen so frequently with a lot of unpublished writers. And I think of it in two ways. So like, I think in the beginning, when you're still figuring out your voice, when you're still writing, you're putting yourself out there. When you compare yourself to others, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? Because the only one that you're in competition with is yourself, because you have to understand, like you said, you have to understand yourself. You have to understand your voice, and you have to understand your writing. You will only do that through practice and through consistency, right? And then if there's a fear, right, I also agree with the mental health aspect of it, right? Start with the insecurity, asking the questions, and so on and so forth. That I completely agree with. I think what writers end up misconstruing a lot of the time is eventually when you put your book out in the market, it becomes a type of competition, because then you're going against other books in the market and you're competing for attention. But I think what writers miss is it's keeping the two separate. The creative process, you yourself, you are only writing for yourself and to improve. But when you put your book out there, you have to do the research and the market research when it's being put up against other people, because if people like it, then you attract the readership. And I think it's trying to differentiate those two with the brand portion, and then like the brand portion and the writing portion of it. Yes,
absolutely. And I think just to sort of leap on that too, is one of the biggest mistakes we all make. And this is from new author all the way up to best authors out there, or even worse, like companies and stuff too, is we need to stop thinking that we're marketing to everyone. We're not marketing to everyone. Right.
Yep. Agreed.
We like the mass market is nonsense. Like if you can look it up, if you haven't heard about it, look up the law of diffusion of innovation. Right. So it just means that what you're looking for is that first 5 to 10% of people, the early adopters and the innovators who believe what you believe. They just get it. They just get your work. They just get what you're putting out into the world. They're the ones who then tip the system into the mass market. Right. And so it's instead remembering that mass marketing is literally wasting your time. Even if you threw a bunch of money at ads for your book, the sales would go up, but the second you removed that money for the ads, the sales would go down again back to where they were, and you might not have lifelong fans anymore, right? So it's one of those things instead where just find your audience, find your niche. We live in a world of 8 billion people, and selling I think in Canada, if you sell 1,000 copies of a poetry book, you're considered a best-selling poet. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I mean, right? Like, picture a room of 1,000 people in it, right? That's a huge room, right?
Yeah.
So it's just
I think because that numbers game, we kind of get lost in it, right?
We do.
We're like, okay, it's almost like we minimize we minimize the value of a single follower because social media is focused on a high numbers game. And while there's an aspect of that, right, having high numbers can bring in sponsors, brands, awareness, sure. But we forget that even with the small communities, like this one with the Right Now community, we're at I want to say we're about 450 subscribers on YouTube. But this must have been like 7-8 months ago. I was at like 50 subscribers, and I approached it with the mindset of like, okay, every single person matters and every single person is valuable. And I think I was able to frame myself in that mindset early on. So that way I didn't trap myself in like, okay, if I don't have big numbers, I'm not a success, right? Every single person is awesome. And I think we've seen that. I can see here in the chats that a lot of the writers here have gotten a lot of value, have absolutely gotten a lot of value. And by the way, I'm seeing some really great questions come in. So make sure, drop your questions. We will hold a Q&A segment at the end. So that way we can make sure we get into the important parts of our authenticity conversation. Not all of it is important, more of the important parts. All right, perfect. So I wanted to get back into this next part of the conversation. So when we're talking about authenticity, Miguel, and we talk about culture, I know culture is a really big part of your framework with leadership and then authenticity for artists. Why does an artist need to have a culture around their writing brand, and maybe explaining what you define culture to be?
Yes. Okay. So in its most simplistic sense, a culture is a group of people with a shared set of values and beliefs, right? So, so what you want, why you want people around you. Everybody has heard this, you're the permutation of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Some would say the 5 ideas you spend the most time with. What you want when it comes to your writing and your creative pursuit is you want people who value what you value. And the reason why is because anybody who doesn't value what you value, if they're providing feedback to your work, that feedback is almost certainly not going to be of any value whatsoever. What matters is people who are doing it, maybe even people who are doing it better than you, people who are already out there in the world, they've got their books published and put in readers' hands, all that. If you can surround yourself with the kind of people who are pursuing what you pursue and value what you value, you are going to get the best kind of feedback ever, because you already share values and practice, right? You will be practicing the same way. You will be seeking out the same way. It doesn't have to be in the same genre. I want to be clear. In fact, I would tell everybody, like, if you can find, like, I'm somebody who's dabbled in literally every single version of writing you can think of, right? And I have
same here, Miguel, and I think that's why we connect very well. We both
very much. Like there are profound gifts in every genre, right? And I say mess with it, meet the people in it, do all that. But the culture is like, if you let's just talk about, so my 2 primary values are curiosity and courage. Okay, I would actually flip those.
Love it. Curiosity and courage. Okay.
So if you have people around you giving you feedback who also care about curiosity and courage, right? They first and foremost are going to have the courage to tell you what they find in your work, right? But they're also going to have the curiosity to interrogate it with you, instead of just being like, this is bad and this needs to change, right? Instead, they're going to be like, why did you make this choice, right? Let's go into that right now, right? And then they're going to hold that beautiful space for you to actually start digging into it, find out why you made this choice, find out why this character does this, find out why you whatever it is. And that is the stuff that gives you, first of all, it gets you closer to your voice, but also it just makes the work better at the end of the day. They're not writing your work for you. These are people who care about you and care about what you care about. And when they tell you, like, there's this problem here, or there might be this problem here, or have you thought about, right? Those are the most valuable conversations you can ever have. And because these people love you and you value the same things, damn well you're not under attack. That they're not coming for you. They're instead like, no, I believe in you. I believe what you're doing, right? Let's make this work better together, right? So that's why culture matters. And you also have to be very careful about who you let into that culture, right? So I work with a lot of writers and artists. There are a couple that I don't really work with anymore because they're faster to judgment than most people are, and that is the antithesis of curiosity, right?
Mhm.
So I don't find an immediate judgment of a thing to be very valuable to me. I want instead somebody who's going to go on the walk with me to figure out why it's not working, right? And so
I love that.
that's why it matters, because a person who comes in and is like, you know what, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. Well, they've just blown holes in your very rickety boat. You know what I mean? And you're going to start to sink right away. So it's instead have the people who are like, no, I'm going to patch this thing with you and I'm going to bail out as we go. Right.
Mhm.
That's why culture matters. I don't think we're lucky in the opportunities that come our way. I think we're lucky in the people who support us when they do. So
I absolutely love that. And I think that resonates. Courtney said, I love that the advice is what we do daily in this community.
Yes.
Right. Which
Yes,
tells
Courtney.
me, Miguel, that of course you were absolutely the right author to bring on to the podcast. Awesome. So I love that, because I know that we try to establish a culture. I think the things that I care about is being kind and then being clear. I think being kind and being clear. So then I was like, all right, well, how do I put that into the world for writers, regardless of what genre they're working on? So I think that's the culture that I really try to emphasize. And so far, I think of the nine months or so, I think we've only gotten like 2 or 3 trolls. But the community here is like very actively engaged. And then the trolls were just obvious. I'm like, all right, it's I take when I deal with negativity and criticism, I've actually always taken a very, very similar approach to Gary Vaynerchuk. And I've always been like, if somebody's like mean towards me or rude, I'm just like, I feel sorry for you. I empathize for you. I'm not going to let you affect me. Best of luck with your journey. Yeah. And we get that a lot, but that's the approach, because there's so much negativity out there. And as we're thinking about authenticity, Miguel, this is just like a question that comes to mind. How do you go about being your authentic self without letting criticism or other people's comments bring you down?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Like I am by no means perfect in that. That is a progress, not perfection situation. But well, actually, here's where the culture comes to your rescue again, right? So if you surround yourself with that kind of people and you get the kind of criticism that gets in, you know what I mean? Somehow it got in and you're a little bit wounded today or whatever it is. They are the first people who will show up and remind you of who you are when you're at your best. Right? Because we can't always remember who we are when we're at our best, especially when we're like, we already know if you're in fear, if you're in anxiety, right? You're in self-preservation mode. You're not at your best, right? So that's where the culture comes to your rescue. And I'm going to go even a little bit further on the culture thing too. I'm going to be a little, because here, like, this is all well and good. And it's like, sunshine and roses and stuff, but let's actually talk about, if you have the right culture around you, I'm going to say the mercenary aspect of it as well. When you have the right culture around you, when one of you succeeds, it usually brings the rest of you with, right?
Agreed.
So,
Absolutely,
and that's the other thing too, right? So it's all of that stuff, right? But the beautiful result is that everybody, like I had a friend of mine who like finally got into a writer's room in Hollywood, and then was able to like bring 2 or 3 other friends along too. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the way it happens, right? It's like, if I believe in your work and I love what you're doing and I believe in you, like, hell yeah, I want you to be in the room with me.
Yeah, I could totally relate with that. I know I lived over in Hollywood, LA for a good 10 years. And I know the saying was always who you know. And I think who you know and networking applies to most industries. If you've established a relationship with somebody, and then that somebody has a specific need, whether they need to hire somebody, whether they need some type of advice, whether they want to do something for whatever they're working on, they're going to first reach out to who they know, which is why networking is so important. It was something that I overlooked and very much struggled with, actually, in my very early days, college, post-college years, where I just didn't really network effectively. But like everything, we learn. We learn with time, right?
Yeah. Actually, I'd say too that social media, for me in the last, I don't know, say 5-6 years, has been a surprisingly prolific source of good networking, like of finding people who believe what you believe because you resonate with their work, or because, maybe you heard them on a podcast and they're fantastic. And then reaching out to them, and depending on the platform, like I've only had maybe 4 or 5 people not reach out back. And when they do reach out to you, you start a conversation. It's usually based on something that you share of value that you found in their work or whatever it is, right? And you can build relationships from there. So this is again why I say be entirely yourself, be aggressively yourself, right? And when I say that, I mean aggressive with yourself to be yourself. Don't self-edit, never allow that. Be exactly who you are, and when people start coming to you, they're going to come. Like, look at your channel, for instance, Kauffman. This has been organic growth. You can't beat organic growth, right? Like, that's like you're making family, you're making culture right here, right now, and that is, as that grows, it grows stably. It grows in a way that we know isn't going to like have the wheels fall off because you paid for a bunch of followers here or somebody paid for this, whatever it is. And
exactly.
People who give a shit and who are learning, right? So it is, it's the most valuable thing. Anyway.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that, Miguel. So with where we're going to go next, let me do a quick announcement. So first off, thank you for joining us today in the Create Right Now podcast. We're having a very dynamic conversation about authenticity and author brands. What we're going to be chatting about next, we're going to start talking about some social media strategies. How can you, as an author, whether you're just starting or whether you're getting closer to publishing your book, what are strategies that you can use to be more authentic on social media, especially when social media can be so challenging for some, right? And it comes down to understanding essences of it. So we're going to be hopping into the social media conversation, and then we'll also be hopping into how do you drive authentic brand at live events. If you are an author, you're going to have to do a live book event when it gets published. You will have to do conferences. So we'll hop into the steps that authors can take to drive their brand more authentically. We'll be doing a live reading of Miguel's Balance, a speculative fiction, which is going to be super exciting. And then we'll do a Q&A. So if you have any questions, drop them in the comments and we'll save them for the Q&A section to help you with writing that first book. And most importantly, if you're getting any value from this, follow and subscribe. We're here every day with the Right Now community, 260 days and counting, to help with the process, lifestyle, and mindset that it takes to help you be an author. So if you want to be alerted when we go live, tap that follow button, tap that subscribe button, and you'll be alerted right now. All right, perfect. And back into it. All right, Miguel. So as we hop into authenticity and social media, how does an author be authentic with social media engagement? I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit of your theory, your philosophy behind it, and see if we can maybe give our writers some clear strategies.
Yeah. So there's three places that I would always go if I'm working with anybody on whatever that's going to be when it comes to a social media strategy for themselves.
Okay.
And so the very first thing you can do is tap your network. And what I mean by that is your culture. Look around. Does anybody already have an audience, right? So audience arbitrage is one of the most important things you can ever leverage, right? So if somebody already even if they have 300 and you have 0, all right, be like, hey, let's do a live stream together. You can ask me questions about my book that's going to be coming out soon because you're so excited that a friend of yours is going to have a book published. You know what I mean? Like something as simple as that. First of all, it gives you an environment where you can answer questions as yourself, right? Because you know this is a friend of yours. This is somebody who cares about your work. Second of all, it gets you an opportunity to start practicing talking about your work, right? It's really hard.
Yeah, because it's knowing how to talk about what you're writing.
Yeah. And it's like going into the public sphere is already a daunting thing to begin with, but it really is hard to talk about your work in a like precise and yet conversational and passionate way. So then this goes into the second part, right? Is don't shy away from passion. Don't shy away from, there's a lot of people who think they have to be reserved. They have to keep themselves to themselves when it comes to their social media presence. Don't do that. Instead, like get excited, make the weird noises you make when you read something that's dope. You know what I mean? Like get excited, have fun. Most importantly, be yourself. And then the third thing when it comes to strategy. So this is where we get down to like the nuts and bolts, right?
Okay.
I think one of the most effective approaches to social media right now is people who we talked about before, show your mistakes, is people who show process. Like I think about what you're doing right now. You're showing you're writing every day and all that kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
So when you approach whatever it is that's vital in your process, like these are the 3 things that are vital in your process, sit down and record a couple of videos about why they are vital in your process, because that speaks to your values. That's already telling people what you value, who you are, and the kind of person that they can actually, expect and they can consume when it comes to your social media presence, right? Like, why does, a work need to light you up in this way? Why does it need to be in this particular genre? Like, what blows your mind back about that, right? Or your hair back about that? And then when you get into these spaces, like I think about, for instance, let's just do a quick one here for Kauffman, right?
Okay, perfect. Love it.
Okay, so fantasy is your space, right? You said that book, Lord of the Rings, is the one that lit you up, all right?
Yep.
Make a video on that.
Yep.
That's what I mean. Like make a video right there being like, I remember, like tell that story. Like bring it down to 60 seconds and be like, I remember I was XYZ years old and I was, like sitting on the floor, I was sitting in my bedroom, whatever it was. And I remember reading like this moment or this chapter or this big beat. And it literally changed the way I felt about, the world or how I operated it, or it changed the way I looked at what a book was capable of, or like that kind of thing. You get into that. You tell the story of that profound telepathy between Tolkien and you know what I mean? And
I like that.
Yeah, and there you go. Like that's your first video. Like this is what brought me into the fantasy space, right?
Interesting.
And then,
so speaking to that passion, it's the core, it's that core inspiration from the very beginning. I like that. It's fascinating.
And then
so then if I were to do that as a post, then how would I go about? So let's say that I have like no knowledge about anything. What are the next steps?
So this is where you got to know your platform, right? Like choose one of the platforms that's going to be worthwhile. I'm going to tell you right now, X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, sort of thing, right? It's not a place that is going to be any kind of really useful for you getting your author stuff out there at the moment. It's not the place to build an audience.
It's because they've transitioned to a paid model for most of their stuff, and the algorithm, it's very much focused. If you want something like that, I actually recommend Threads. Threads has a very great writing community. If you're looking for like short form writing, Threads is a good place. Obviously videos, YouTube is the video king. Facebook is still undervalued. Find Facebook writing groups or other ones. Is there a platform that you would recommend, Miguel?
Yeah, well, for me, it's especially because if it's going to be just you at the beginning, which it always is make one thing that does a lot of things, right? So you've got the video. Exactly right. So make that first post, put it on Instagram, thread to it on the other side, tag a couple people that you know in Threads, that sort of thing. That immediately can be repurposed now for YouTube Shorts. You know what I mean? Like it's that sort of stuff, right? Like where you can get into that space where you start speaking out there in the world, and then so like if doing this for Kauffman again, sort of thing, right? Like we do that, and then he can talk about his work in progress, his WIP, and how that relates to that initial like, wow, this is what you can do with fantasy. And this is where the authenticity comes into play, because I had an aha moment as well with Lord of the Rings, but mine might have been a little bit different than his, right? And all of a sudden I hear his perspective, the thing that really blew him up about it. And I hadn't thought about it that before. And now all of a sudden it's literally changed the way I think about that book or other books. And now I'm like, oh, this guy opens me up to stuff that I hadn't really thought about before. I hadn't put it in those words before. I hadn't heard it in that phrasing, right? So that's why authenticity matters, because plenty of people talked about Lord of the Rings, but nobody's talked about it the way you have yet, right?
Interesting. I really like that. So then I think about that. So I think about, so the one topic it's going to be is I start off with the thing that made me passionate about writing, which I love. And then 2, connecting that to my current book that I'm working on.
Yeah.
And then is there a final, like, do you create like an ask after that? Or like, how would you tie something like that off?
Then, so the tying it off this is the big thing, is providing value for free. Right. So it's the hardest thing for people to wrap their heads around. Like, no, I need to monetize. Right. Yep. I'm like, no, give it away for free, whatever that thing is that you're going to provide a value. Right. Maybe it is like I wrote this flash fiction that's 400 words. Right. So I'm just going to read that. I'm going to print it over here on Medium as that fellow wrote it here. I'm just gonna do that. I'm just gonna put it out into the world, and then what you're going to invite is clear-eyed feedback, right? And you're going to invite you can even I like prompting people with questions. You could be like, this particular character who does this and this and this sort of thing, right? Tell me about what your impressions are of that character. Or tell me how you would have done this differently and why. You know what I mean? Like it's those kinds of things. Start an actual dialogue with your audience. Because this is the thing that people get caught up in, is they just see audience as they're the ones who are going to provide me dollars. Right, rather than no, like these are people, right? Like these are people instead. Like, so start a dialogue. What's beautiful about that too is you can sometimes find a couple new members of your culture, right, and bring them to you through that. But you start from that space, giving it away for free, and then on that day where you've got like, hey, I just got this short story published in XYZ magazine. Go buy the magazine. You know what I mean? Like, go out there, buy the magazine. The more that happens, and hell, read it on your, like, make a video, read it on your Instagram or whatever it's going to be. It's that kind of thing. Like, the day that you have something that is going to provide money in some way, shape, or form, you've already established trust and you provide value for free. Right.
Interesting. How long do you think it takes to generally build this up?
I always say go long term, right? Like like abandon short termism at all costs, right? Like that is not a sustainable model. So instead, be like, no, what's something that I can do, constantly providing value on, like looking at this particular kind of writing in this way, or here's how you integrate poetry or a poetic mindset into fiction. Right. Some people say it's not possible, but here's how, right? Or it's like that kind of stuff to start building new ways of it's the goal is to show people something they would not have been able to see on their own. Right. Yeah, it's
absolutely.
Only through your version, only through your vision. Right. So but you have to do it at a sustainable pace. All this, like, you need to post 46 times a week sort of thing, right? Like, no. Just post quality and value, and eventually it starts to rise. Right? It's just
I absolutely love that. I think that's phenomenal. I think if I was framing, if I was framing this as my strategy, if I was, say, I'd never posted before, young Kauffman, I would be, all right, create a video. And the video would be how I became passionate about writing, what my book is, and then how this connects to the culture of my values, what I want to do moving forward. And then the way that I make that sustainable is then I do a similar type of thing. I do that consistently over a long period of time, whether I make similar videos, or if it's something that's more text-based, like Medium, I do similar articles, right? You can do a video, you can do an article, you can do a podcast, audio, what's a video, audio, written word. Yeah. So I think, and then you just do that sustainably over a long period of time. Yeah. Whether that is a year, a couple years, and then in the meantime, you keep writing your books and you just keep improving. And I think that's an absolutely great strategy, my friend.
Yeah, and to add actually to what you said is on the third one, it's like, okay, the first one you said why, right? You said like, this is why I do what I do. And then on the second one, you're like, and here's what I'm doing, right? And then on the third one, that's when you're like, and this is what I'm inviting you all here for, right? Is to get better at writing, to share your fuck ups, to like when did you fall on your face and how did you fall on your face, like all of that stuff, right? Like if you just learned something from an extraordinary mentor that you're like, I need to share this right now, then go out and share it, right? It's that kind of thing. Like the third one is it's always that, like, you talk about why you do what you do. You did it great, by the way, actually at the top of the podcast right now, right? This is why I do what I do, and I want everybody to do it, right? So it's that you bring everybody into it that way. And it can even be something even simpler than that. If you don't have these grand visions, it could just be like, has anybody looked at this particular fantasy text from this point of view? Because I find it super fascinating, right? Like, what if you read Moby Dick as a satire? You know what I mean? Like, what if you, like, does that work? Like, it could be anything, right? It could be absolutely anything that really gets you going and blows your hair back.
I absolutely love that. I think that's amazing. I think really understanding it sounds like if I were to summarize a lot of what we've been chatting about, it sounds like it's really understanding what your core values are, and then figuring out how to package that, almost, so to speak, or how to put that out in a way that's relatable to you, because then that will be relatable to other people. And that kind of seems that like the core of what you're speaking to.
Yeah, and if one of the fun things to do is, if you have that dope culture that you like, you've got your 3 or 4, your go-tos, I guarantee you have extraordinary conversations about the stuff you care about. Right?
I completely agree. Like, how many conversations have we had here in this Right Now community in the past 9 months? Yeah. And I know a lot of the viewers would say that. And I'm sure you've had so many incredible conversations with your communities.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. Share if they're willing, and it doesn't have to be a video sort of thing, right? But if they're willing to be like, hey, I was talking to, my XYZ friend the other day, sort of thing, right? We had this wonderful conversation about this, and we got this sort of thing, right? Never thought about it that way before, right? It's it's the stuff that lights you up. Don't shy away from that stuff, and a matter of fact, embrace it.
Awesome. So, Miguel, I think that's an absolutely great, incredibly great strategy for social media. Now, let's instead turn the attention towards live events, right? The one thing that every author has to face eventually, the live book event. Eventually, now, obviously, if we're self-publishing, a lot of authors might not necessarily do the in-person live event, but a lot of authors who end up writing more books eventually, or if you're doing traditional publishing, you'll be doing a live event at some point in your future, or maybe going to writing conventions, right? Connecting with other writers. So I pose this question to you, Miguel. What steps can an author take to drive an authentic brand at conferences or book events?
This goes back to practice. It's in the same way that you treat it as a writer, right? Like, find opportunities to network, find opportunities to speak that are practice for the big one. When you're in front of an audience, like 200, 300, 400 people, whatever that's going to be at one of those live events. And the point is this is why I say to be aggressively yourself, is who you are should be the same everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, it should be like, no editing, no editing who you are as a person, no editing your excitement about your work, no editing anything like that. Just give yourself to the world. And I know that right now that feels like a very dangerous proposition, right? But this is why it goes back to curiosity and courage, right? Is just make sure you are practicing speaking the way you want to speak to the world. And when you do that, by the way, then you become like a wonderful representative and spokesperson for your work, right? And we've seen this is the thing I'm trying to help everybody avoid is we always talk about separating art from artist, right? Well, unfortunately, there's a big gray area in that space where if the artist has made their particular persona based on this something that has made their art very popular, then the moment you find out that persona isn't real is the moment that the art suffers too, and you don't kind of have a choice anymore. The art will go. The art will go down on impact. With like, I'll give the easiest example I can think of is everybody loved Tiger Woods before everything was found out about him, right? And we loved him because he seemed like to be like the nice guy of golf, right? And then we learned that all of that was fake. It was all bullshit. Right. And now like he like broke the social contract. Right. And we just can't abide that anymore. And, F him. So
one of the core reasons that people were so felt away with the Twitter to X transition. It's that same exact thing.
100%. Right. It is. That's the thing is it just went against all of its values. Right. It's as simple as that. Right. And we can't survive a what I would call a conflict of values. If somebody says their values are this, but then their actions are this thing, right? Like they will go down on impact with that. Like we can't feel about them the way we felt about them before. This is why just be yourself, whatever that means, and find out what that means, find out what gets you excited. And so when you come to these moments to practice and stuff, like get friends of yours. I would do this in media training. Get friends of yours to ask you the hard questions. Get friends of yours to do mock interviews with you about your work, because you will have to do interviews about your work. One of my friends, he won the CBC Literary Prize last year for short fiction. Extraordinary writer. Check him out. His name is Will Richter. we did a couple of practice interviews and stuff beforehand so that he could like gin up, like, this is how I can talk about my work, right? So yeah, it's practice in the same way that you write. And unfortunately, you have to accept that the lion's share of the marketing for your work is going to have to be done by you. That's it.
Even if you go traditional publishing, you will still have to do a lot of advertising. Traditional publishing they will do a lot of aspects of it, but you still have to have a brand. You still have to push regardless, because I know there's a much greater interest towards self-publishing, but I think with self and traditional, I tend to get a mix in this community of the interest towards both.
Yeah.
Awesome. So by the way, I think Dana brought up a really great success story here. Dana said, my first step was I took speech classes in college and then looked for opportunities. My first public appearance was at WorldCon in Denver. I was terrified, but I pushed through it. Now, after years of practice, I look forward to it.
Hell yes, Dana.
Absolutely, Dana. Absolutely incredible. Dana is also another really incredible writer. She joins us on our Wednesday writer group. So very, very awesome. Let's see. And awesome. So I think, that was absolutely great advice, Miguel. I think now's probably a great time to transition. So what we're going to do is we're going to hop into a live book reading. It's like is it a book?
It's a short story. It's a short
story. I was like, I knew I was missing something there. So what we're going to do is we'll hop into a live short story reading. Miguel is going to read I think we can probably get through like the first half of it is what I'm thinking, Miguel.
Okay.
I was looking at the line breaks so that way we don't take up too much time. And then if the audience likes it, they can go check out the rest. They can go check out the ending. So we'll do a live reading. And then after that, we're going to be doing a Q&A. So what questions do you have for Miguel or myself about driving your author brand, about being more authentic with social media, live events, culture, authenticity, any of this? Drop your questions and we'll be posing them in the Q&A segment right after the live reading. All right, perfect. So it's a live reading. It's called Balance. And Miguel, do you just want to give a little context for what this is?
Sure. So this the driving question for this story for me was what happens when the wrong hands hold power for too long? And the response was a world that was in the very near future. And from there on, it's kind of self-explanatory.
All right, perfect. So I think, is that a good size for you?
Yeah, I can do that. Here, I'm going to actually make this a bit big. Perfect. That's perfect.
All right, beautiful. So awesome. I'll scroll along and start whenever you're ready.
The judge's jowls wiggled, and Lucian noticed things he hadn't before. The dyed fringe of stringy hair, the liver-spotted head, crimson-shot eyes, turtle-beak lips, hasty concealer. He thought of the mildewed dish rag in the farmhouse sink that never fully dried and wondered if everyone in the yawning courtroom felt the same way. Were they thinking about hair dye and rags? The judge peered over bottle-thick glasses, scrutinizing a sheet of paper from a stack he held in his black-veined hands. Someone cleared their throat as the judge milked this moment of listening silence. Sarah shifted in the seat next to Lucian. Indeed, indeed, said the judge in a high-pitched voice that belonged in the throat of a cartoon mouse. No trace history of familiar diseases beyond the standard, clean genetic profiles, finest kind, such as it is. He looked up at Lucian. What of the mouth? Does your second have its teeth in order, Mr. Astor? Sarah, his wife whispered below breath, for herself. The judge lifted his eyes and frowned. Had he heard that? The answer came with unpleasant grace. Mr. Astor, as this is your first visit to the court of application, I will stay penalty, but should another unsolicited sound come out of your second, I will level a ruling of contempt that will be paid for in penance. Must I repeat? Lucian squeezed Sarah's hand beneath the table. No, Your Honor, I understand. Be sure it understands, the judge grated with a nod toward Sarah. She squeezed back, an angry squeeze. I know, love. We'll get through this. Now, Mr. Astor, are your second's teeth in order? Yes, Your Honor, inspected by the same minister of the court that oversaw the physical. This seemed to appease. but the judge held his watch-yourself expression long enough to leave its threat in the air, and longer still to remind the room what a man in his chair might do if the mood struck. Everyone understood, but still, the jowls. Indeed, indeed, by this report, you both meet the aesthetic standard, though it was close for your second at 125 pounds. He paused for a look at Sarah that included a slow slug of his lips. It seems that an excess weight, however, is carried acceptably across the chest. Please have it stand for the court. Sarah stood and came out from behind the table with her eyes up. She knew what came next, and she wasn't about to give the judge his little delight in ordering it. Before anyone spoke again, she stripped naked and stood on a brass tile set in the floor in front of the judge's bench. Lucian had prepared to feel something, sadness, impatience, whatever, but that was before the jowls and makeup. Now, hate pricked his fingertips, urging him to find the neck in that flesh and squeeze until the jiggle stopped. He breathed deep. This is why we're here. This is what's necessary. The judge leaned forward for a better view, mouth open, adjusting his glasses, dragging his eyes from Sarah's toes to her dark brown hair. He made a yum noise, nothing agreeable about it, then creaked back into his seat before gathering up papers, but only to stare over them at Sarah's breasts. Right then, he managed, his voice damp. Let the record show that its weight now tops out at 128 pounds, clearing the 130-pound threshold. No blemishes on the skin, left breast somewhat smaller than the right, but within prescribed limits. Health and nutrition appear optimal for genetic clarity, and the head is in proportion to all other extremities. Eyes are more green than blue. Please correct the record, clerk. A voice from behind the judiciary bench muttered a waifish, "Yes, sir." The judge moved to speak, but Sarah beat him to the punch again. She raised her arms and turned on the spot, her legs slightly spread. Lucian squirmed, but he could do nothing worthwhile save to be awed by her composure. Even here, under all this scrutiny, nothing got near her. The judge took his time. Indeed, indeed. All hair removal below the chin meets regulation, indeed. The second is in order. Note for the record that both medical and visual inspections passed a code. Another disembodied yes, sir, from somewhere at the judge's back. Behind every great man was a runner collecting crumbs. There would always be the physical inspection, regardless of pre-screening. It was the judiciary's privilege to be a pervert. Sarah waited to be released, standing proud, always eyes up. He wondered what wonderful, awful things she was doing to the judge in her mind. At least there, justice still existed. The judge's lip twitches had Lucian wondering what his free hand was up to beneath the desk. The man was well beyond his morning kickstand years, and his pasty skin suggested much of his body was barely up to the task of living. The thought of him trying to fondle his flaccid self was enough to gag goats, but something he'd heard a long time ago came to mind. Bad sign for the heart if there's no steel in the dawn pipe. Maybe there's a heart attack in the judge's tea leaves. Could be any day. That was something. That was good. The missing hand came back up onto the desk. The second will retake its seat. The crowd shuffled and whispered behind Lucian. If it was in solidarity with Sarah or in judgment, he couldn't guess. She dressed without haste, all in her own time, and sat down. A reassuring squeeze of his wrist, out of sight. I'm okay. We're okay. The judge exchanged one stack of papers for another, clearing the hunger from his throat. Now then, Mr. Astor, concerning your nomination of one Evan Lightfoot, let the record show that the nominee is listed in the file as low-blooded. You will have the next 10 minutes to make your case for the court, if you please. The room shushed itself into silence. They wanted to hear about the monster he and Sarah had chosen. Not to gawk and chatter, but to compare. Lucian knew all the questions they'd be asking themselves because he had asked them too. Is our nominee bad enough to put us over the top? How much stretching can the truth take before it snaps? Maybe law had always been like this, fake hair and whoever's bullshit smelled best. Lucian hoped not. Morality must have been real at some point, just not today. Sarah had subjected herself to that bastard with a gavel exactly for this moment. Don't blow it with morality. Sir, he said, hating the quiver that had found its way into his voice, as you can see from the evidence provided, the witness statements that he stopped fast as the judge waved a dismissive hand. Your words, please, Mr. Astor. The file is thorough and thoroughly reviewed, but I require your words for this court. Proceed. A babble of tension undulated through the crowd. Another squeeze of support at his thigh. Fine. If he wanted a speech, he'd get one. Lucian rose from behind the table. Mr. Astor, you're not required to stand. I require it, Your Honor. A raised eyebrow. Permission enough. Evan Lightfoot is, by all definitions of the court, a danger to the public, to children, and to the system. Creaking chairs. That perked up a few people. He is known to have sought relations beyond marriage with women and men, and he is directly connected to incidents of roaming reported near Park Sinclair and Park Dunsmuir. He paused as the judiciary scanned more pages from around those glasses until he found what he was looking for, the seed they had planted. Park Sinclair, the judge read. It's near 3 early childhood care facilities. Yes, Your Honor, there are two more near Dunsmuir. More ripples of unease behind him, the other applicants weighing their barley against his. Hard to tip the scales against child molestation, even here, even now. Mr. Astor, what are your substantiations? The seed was a meadow now. Evan was deviant, consorted with men and women, and was identified near children. Won't someone think of them? It was all bullshit, but bullshit had the power. Just ignore the hand beneath the desk. Lucian continued, we have the sworn statements from 14 educators who together represent each of the primary education facilities. All of them have described the nominee in detail and provided specific dates and times when he was on or near each institution. Lucian quietly thanked those people who had risked their lives to sign those statements. We also have photographic evidence, and you'll find in the materials provided that Evan Lightfoot consorted with known system disruptors. The judge nodded emphatically. Yes, yes, sir, we can't have disruptors in the mix. The system maintains. It was time to put an ugly bow on this. He swallowed hard, thought of Sarah's sacrifice, of everyone's. Adding to this, Your Honor, is evidence not presented in the file you hold. As I know, this court does not accept the testimony of children. He trailed off, the lie thicker than his throat could handle. Yes, urged the judge, coming off his chair. It felt as if the room had stopped breathing. He thought of how they'd put all these pieces together over the past months, all three of them, sudden tacticians in a game no one would ever want to play. But it had to be this way, and damn everything else. It was as close to moral as they were going to get. It was right. It was right. We have, Your Honor, secured the testimony with fathers present of two young boys who were victims of Evan Lightfoot. Someone in the courtroom muttered a stoic shit. The judge thumbed through the medical file again, making a show of weighing the offered evidence. Making a show of procedure, of structured, incorruptible justice. Every law, every bill, and every page in those dead hands, the people lined up in murmuring rows, all a show for the hammer and fist class. The ones who would never understand that threats don't scare people into submission, they just learn to talk a little softer. A broad-backed bailiff bent low for a whispered exchange with the judiciary. Lucian couldn't hear a word of it. Then the judge straightened and called an ancient activist from the wings. The man doddered across the room, footsteps echoing. Lucian heard the squeaks of the wooden chairs, the brush of fabric. Many knew where this could go from here, how badly it could go. The archivist finally arrived and stood shaky beneath the judge's stare. Mr. Lent, please usher the files of this proceeding, that of one Lucian Astor and his second, to records receiving, if you have it in you to make it before next week. A few nervous laughs burbled up from the human stew at Lucian's back. Mr. Lent gave a weak nod and a resigned smile as he took the file. Paper only for this court, no computers. Paper burns easy. Get on with it then, barked the judge. He shook his head before turning back to Lucian and Sarah, the moment they'd all been waiting for. Mr. Astor, given your testimony, the available evidence, and the racial health of both you and your second, by decree of this court, your application for reproduction is granted. Seems you're lucky I'm in good spirits. The room let out its breath, and Lucian couldn't help but take a cautious look over his shoulder. Sadness from a few. A thin smile of congratulations here and there. Some anger. Couldn't go anywhere these days without it. But that's how the system would work, Lucian's father had warned. Limit resources, make the people compete for what's rightfully theirs, keep them looking left and right instead of up. Zero-sum mindsets in a zero-sum machine. Miss you, Dad. So glad you're not here. Sarah made a little noise only he could hear, enough to snap his eyes back to the judiciary bench. The judge wouldn't like someone turning their back on him. The gavel was in his hand now, and the tall bailiff had returned to his side, a beat-up cardboard box held in his hands. The judge nodded and stood, clearing his throat, jowls wibbling. There's always room for jello. The record will show that this case was prosecuted fairly, with dignity and respect for all present parties. He paused. For applause? Laughter? Nothing was funny anymore, thought Lucian. Parody had remade the world in its image. Finally, Mr. Astor, you have been granted the right of reproduction before this court. Your reciprocal obligation under the law must be carried out in the next 48 hours, and proof of execution of this responsibility must be presented to the People's House no more than 24 hours after that. Do you understand your duty to the judiciary? He nodded. Very well. Will the bailiff please present Mr. Astor with the instrument of the court? The bailiff obliged and came forward. Cardboard box held uncaringly. Lucian peered over the corrugated lip to see the instrument of the court laid out on a small hand pillow the color and texture of a porn theater seat. No grandeur, no ritual, just a worn handgun and 2 loose bullets. He almost laughed. Almost. Casings must be returned and accounted for along with incontrovertible proof, the bailiff recited by rote, putting in the time. 2 guards appeared on cue to guide Sarah and Lucian from the courtroom and through the crowd. Sarah walked close, supportive. Even after all this, she was gracious, giving. Today and in everything leading up to today, Sarah had guided them all forward. It came at a cost she'd never admit. And there's still more to pay, he thought, as he felt the contents of the box shift. They passed under the courtroom's arched entryway, where, engraved in beautiful calligraphy, it read, "Justice is balance." Right.
Wow. Wow.
It's the first time I ever got to do that.
I am completely blown away by that for a number of reasons. First off, very great writing. Absolutely excellent writing. The execution of that story was very well done. I was very much pulled into the plot, the characters, and the world, which were so clear. It makes complete sense why that story was published because it was just very well done. So my hat's off to you, my friend. That's awesome.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
And then in addition to that, you said you haven't really read it like that before. Mm-hmm. The reading you did for that was pretty impressive. You did a really good job with that.
Oh,
you captured a type of voice for it that felt like it was authentic, and it pulled me into the reading experience. And sometimes authors do it and sometimes they don't, but it wasn't your normal voice, but it's kind of like a reading voice. It was a really nice reading. Very, very well done.
I always worry that I go too fast when I talk, so much appreciated.
No, I think that was actually at a good pace, and we'll probably see from our community as well. So Miguel, let's throw it in the chat in the comments so if people want to read the ending of that, and I would say that was about, what was that, 60%, 70% of the story?
I'd say about 60, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so that's about 60%. So if you want to read the ending of that story, if you want to learn that climax, I'm like, what? He has the bullets and a reproduction. Like, I want to know what the mystery is. I was so hooked. I was like, I usually cut them off at about the 10-minute mark for the readings, but I was so engaged in your story and I really wanted to know the ending.
Good.
So very well done. But what was that?
I said better that than the other thing.
If our audience, if any of them want to go check out the rest of the story, where can they find it?
You can get linked to here. I'll throw it in the chat. So here is the wonderful human beings, Rappahannock Review, who published the story. So that's where you'll find it right there. You can also navigate to it through my website, and you'll get there as well. But again, thank you though for the opportunity to do that. That was a lovely experience for me.
Awesome. And I'll throw that in here. Perfect. Let's see. That should be. I was like, I have to actually make sure that the link went through. All right, perfect. Yeah, so I just connected. I just dropped the link in there. It works well. And then after the stream, I'll drop it in the YouTube description again, in addition to your website. So that was pretty incredible. Now, and thank you for reading that. That was really, really cool. I always love reading different examples and hearing different examples of just different types of stories that I'm not used to. It's with that type of story, it's not something that I would immediately gravitate towards if I'm like, okay, a court case, right? It's not always something that I read because I'm a nerd. I go towards fantasy and sci-fi, but I loved it. I was engaged. That's a great example of a short story. So I thought that was really, really cool. Now, and you said, so how long ago was it since that was published?
I think that was published in 2022.
Okay.
And the reason why I say I think that is because I remember getting the acceptance at the end of the year, I think in 2021, something like that, but published in 2022. And the reason why I wanted to put this one out there right now is that story, I think, is one of the most effective things I've ever done. And I really want more eyes on it. I want more people to read it and explore it and be in equal measure appalled and intrigued by it. So
yeah, and it definitely looks like a lot of the community really enjoyed it. Miguel, you gave us a wonderful audiobook moment. It was amazing. Wow, indeed. Speechless. Kauffman is jealous and wants to invite you for dual Saturday readings. clearly they're a fan of your reading with mine. I get really into mine with like character voices. I spent a good 10 years of acting experience when I was younger as well, so it lets me pull on that inner actor. So
the one voice I was not going to put on was the judge, because in my head he does sound like Mickey Mouse. I just want it's the voice of a cartoon mouse. He sounds like Mickey Mouse. He's the most appalling human being you can think about, and I just can't do that. Can't do the voice. So
I think what you did works well, because with readings, there's two strategies. One is you just go an author, like a narrator voice for everything. Or the second strategy is you do the voices for each character. It changes. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. Awesome. So with that out of the way, let's dig in. Let's do some Q&A. So if you have any questions about having an authentic brand, anything to Miguel about what Miguel is working on, about his writing, or about things to help you with your branding, now is the time. Drop those questions and we'll throw them up on the screen. Let's see. So while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I have a great question that came to mind. What obstacles have you seen that prevent writers from being more authentic? Are there like some really common obstacles that you see as of late, or maybe this year?
Yes. So one of the things that shifted, about 7 years ago, my far better half, she very talented writer, better than me. She wrote a book. She sent it out. She got representation, and all that was moving really, really well. And then we, had kids, and so
the family. Okay.
Indeed. And so she actually decided to set that aside for the last few years, and then getting back into it. We've seen this massive shift in what the industry is, right? And what it is now is it's much more a numbers game than you realize. And so this is what I want to go back to. What gets in the way is the rejection and the silence, right? So there is much more silence and much more rejection, much more form rejection than there used to be in this space. And so people tend to take that to heart. And I'm here to tell you, do not. Rejection does not mean anything about your ability or quality as a writer. It just means that you might have caught somebody on a specific day where they had read something a little bit like it, or they're just pissed off because the last person didn't follow any of the rules for the query process, or maybe their boss yelled at them. You know what I mean? Like anything can get in the way of you connecting with somebody. So it's just one of those numbers games that just remember, don't take it personally. And because I've seen it literally like stop very talented writers in their tracks, because like I'd say the last 2 or 3 years in particular, you have a publishing industry that's a bit more tentative with new writers. And it's almost like the stakes are higher for them. And at least I think they think that it is. And so they're a bit more tentative, and there's just more form rejections out there on the planet, right? So don't take it seriously. That is the biggest obstacles I can see. And the silence is a tough one, by the way. Like when you have
you put something out there and nobody responds.
Yeah, when you have like that many, like I was thinking about my wife's most recent book, right? Like she's got a couple of page requests and stuff, which is great, but there's been way more silence than she is definitely used to. And so
I think that the strategy is you have to be proactive about getting feedback.
Yes.
Right? Join a community, 100%. Go make friends with somebody else who's also writing a book. I think sometimes we assume we put it out there and people will respond, but we have to remember there's a million different options out there, right? Unless somebody like, people don't care about your writing or your work inherently. until you have some type of value proposition that makes them care.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting with the awareness conversation, and especially with comparing ourselves to others, something, and this like moment always really stood out to me. Like I said, I did about 10 to 15 years of customer service, probably served well over 200 to 400,000 people. Like I counted, I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And I got to that point where I was good with it eventually. But in some of my early days, there was this one person who stood out at one of the coffee shops, who they were the type of person, when you walked in a coffee shop, they like made a genuine conversation, an authentic conversation with every single person. Young, old, mean, nice, like everyone. And I never understood it. I'm like, how do you figure out how to have an authentic like moment, and I thought an authentic experience in a busy coffee shop all the time? And their response always stood out to me. Their response was this: because I have an awareness for other people. And that speaks to the same thing that we deal with as writers, because we don't know where other people are coming from, whether they're giving great comments, bad comments, or lukewarm comments. We assume we assume what they say is truth, and we don't take into consideration the awareness of all of the context of where they're coming from at their life. And this is like what you were saying, right? They could be having the best day of their life, could be having the worst day of their life, but we only take the stuff at face value.
Yeah. So that's why curiosity is your superpower. Curiosity is always your superpower, right? Like, be curious about everyone, even the people that would normally make your skin crawl. Like, be curious, wonder what they're going through or what they went through. Yeah.
Awesome. And then let's see. So next question. So from Courtney, let's see. So Courtney said, how can you build a readership before you publish?
This goes back to what we were talking about before, right? There's basically three questions you need to answer when you come out into the world, right? Is you need to answer the question of trust, and then you need to answer the question of what are you peddling, and then you need to answer the question of can you show and prove, right? Can you keep doing this over and over and over again? Are you reliable, I guess is the best way to put it. And so this, by the way, goes back to the tentative publishing industry right now, is you are an unknown quantity until they're like, oh, wait, you've got 1,000 followers, 2,000 followers, 3,000 followers. So the way to do it is, first of all, put your work out there. I'm 50-50 on a lot of literary magazines, even some of the bigger ones, just because like I've been published in them before, and I've had like crickets on the other side of those publications, right? What that usually ends up being is just your ability to build up a bio, a resume of where you've been published before, right? So, but the point is to get it out there, give something that you can point to as you are starting to build either a social media presence or a blog presence. If somebody mentioned that in the chat, or whatever it is, as you start to put yourself more and more out there, be able to point to something that is like a valuable, good published story that exists there. Now, unfortunately, there's also some magazines out there that put their stuff behind a paywall, which means like you like to see it, you have to buy the magazine. Now, hopefully some of them are moving away from that, but put it out there, and also put it out there for free, right? Like if somebody's like, I really want to publish you, but I can only pay you a $50 honorarium, high five, hell yes, right? Like that's it, right? Like I'm going to give you $50 for your work. Let's go, let's do it, right? Like just put it out there for free, put it out there in places where people can find it, and start sharing it wherever you think is the best place to share it. Right now, there's plenty of research you can do on how best to use a LinkedIn or an Instagram or a Facebook or whatever it is to start sharing it with people that you want to get out in front of. Right, but
do you have a recommendation for a platform that you think's one of the best ones right now for writers to put their stuff out there?
Yeah. So first of all, to go back to the Medium conversation about that friend there, Medium is a good one. I have opinions, we'll say, on whether or not you do a paid membership or not, right? So if you do a paid membership, that's what allows you to monetize your Medium thing, but it's so hit or miss, not because of the quality of writing. It's just so hit or miss that I just recommend putting it up there for free and wherever you can, putting it up there for free. Yeah, putting Wattpad is great. Like, do that kind of stuff. Just any of those places where you can point to for free, where your work is there, where anybody can find you, and then you start bringing the value through the social media presence, right? However that's going to be, and also again you build credibility. The more things you publish out there, and of course in particular if you get it with literary magazines, the more credibility you are building over time.
Awesome. Great answer. All right. So we have our next question from J.A. My question: does grassroots publishing still work in 2024? I knew of a woman who came up with an idea, published it herself, and called hundreds of churches. Could that approach still work today?
Yes and no is the answer. So my point is this: do you have 6 months of dedicated time to give to the grassroots publishing side of things? If you do, then you can make it work, right? But you got to be really clear about where you're going to execute on audiences, how you're going to get in front of the eyes that need to read what you do, at least who you believe needs to read what you do. Like if you have a network of people who are willing to boost the signal of your work, then yes, absolutely it can work out there. But it takes a lot of work. And my recommendation is find the people who exist out in the world, and there are plenty of them, who are doing it and doing it well in a way that you're like, oh, I think I could get behind that, right? Because there is a lot of dedicated time behind doing the grassroots publishing side of things. Because once you get published, then you have to go into the next space, and the next space is, all right, how do I get it in front of bigger eyes, bigger publishers, right? And then to do that, you're like, okay, I got to submit for this award and submit for this award and submit for this award. And then that takes a bunch of work. You have to submit for this grant, and that takes a bunch of work, right? So it is, I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying that, like, make sure you have the time to dedicate to it. Otherwise, it's going to be a really frustrating affair where you feel like you're not getting anywhere. You feel like you're not pushing any boulder anywhere uphill.
Awesome. That's absolutely great answer. I think the time factor is what's so interesting, because so many of us don't have a lot of time. I know a lot of first-time unpublished writers are probably still making their income through a main job. I see a mix of a lot of this community, or just writers in general, either working a 9-to-5 job or a job of sorts, and then trying to do this on the side. 2, students who are trying to do this outside of a school schedule. And then 3, the retired. Those who are retired and it's like, okay, now I can focus on writing. So there's the 3 aspects, or the 3 types of writers I see the most. And I think figuring out, like, how much time do you actually have to commit to it? And then will that amount of time you invest, will that provide the greatest return on your time? And I think if I was thinking about somebody who asked me that question and be like, okay, should they go to churches? I think that could be a part of a strategy, right? Because I think it wouldn't hurt to go to like 2 to 3 of your local churches and establish a connection. You could build a community, because I think it's more build a community with them, or like my local bookstore. I would want to establish a connection with my local bookstore, talk with the people who work there, talk with the librarian, talk with the owner, go to libraries, right? So I think part of that could be it, in addition to the social media stuff.
Yeah.
The attention of the world is in social media. That's where the attention is. That's where everything that happens in our world is done through a lens of Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, or X, formerly Twitter, and the main social media platforms. So that's just where the attention is at. So I think it's combining the 2 of them. Absolutely. And then I have another great question here from Doreen. So Doreen said, my questions: does anyone even read blogs anymore? Would a poetry prompt would a poetry prompt page be a good idea?
I got a great answer for that. If you have the opportunity, you might already know about them. Check out Rattle. Rattle magazine is one of the, I guess they're not even a magazine anymore. There's so many things. Rattle is one of the people doing it best right now in the poetry space. They're one of the few publishers who has adapted to the digital age in a way that is like beyond compare. They are killing it every year. They're making great revenue and really putting big work out in front of big people. Most of their readership is agents and editors and publishers, right? So,
and they're called Rattle. R-A-T-T.
Yeah, R-A-T-T-L-E. And there's another one too. Frontier Poetry is pretty good, and Palette poetry is pretty good as well.
Awesome.
Palette. Look what they do on their blogs, and look what they do in the podcast space too. Actually, like that's a really, really cool way to get out there. But yeah, I think people are reading blogs so long as the blog isn't the last thing. And what I mean by that is it's not the dead end, right? It's like you land there and you're like, okay, we're done. I read the blog and then I'm out. Instead, it's like, read the blog. Here's a really cool resource at the end of the blog that you can go out to and learn more about how to do poetry. Or here's a really cool resource you can to find readings in your neighborhood, or whatever it is. Like always remember to provide value at the end of the blog. And yes, the thesis of the blog, I'm sure that's valuable too, but give them everything. Give everybody everything. Like it sounds crazy, but give everybody everything.
Absolutely love that. And then let's see, it looks like from ML. So a little bit more of a general question. So has anyone ever thought about creating an audiobook of their work on YouTube? I have thought about doing it with one of my books that isn't now on Kindle Unlimited. Is this something that you've been asked or thought about before?
No, I love the idea. It's fresh, right? Like I like do that. It actually I love a good concept album when it comes to music. You know what I mean? Like this is what that kind of vibes with me about. Like this feels like that. It also feels a little bit like Andy Weir, who wrote oh my god, what's the book about Mars starring Matt Damon in the movie?
The Martian.
The Martian, there you go. The way he wrote it, like he wasn't picking up anybody or anything for his work, and so he just started like submitting it online chapter by chapter on his own blog, right? And it ended up, becoming all this big wonderful thing, right? But the point is anything that feels right for your work, like, oh, I think it would work in a really good audiobook translation, giving it away for free. I say try it. Try it. Give it. It's not a big ask anymore to go. I mean, hell, public libraries, for instance, you can go record in a booth now in a public library. At least we can up here in Vancouver, and in Calgary they have that too for free, right? So like, go find a booth that you can do for free that's soundproof. Record it and release it. Release it episodically. Here's chapter 1. Here's chapter 2. Here's chapter 3. Right? Like anything again that you can point to afterwards, I think is a great idea.
I absolutely love that. And Emma, it's interesting that you asked that question, because I'm going to probably do something similar-ish with my book, The Last Scarecrow. I'm probably going to do a mix of the audiobook with doing a YouTube experience, since this is a predominantly live stream community. Once I figured out the logistics and we get closer, probably after I get through the second draft, I'll start thinking of the audiobook, how I'm going to tackle that. But I'm glad we're on the same page, my friend. Thank you so much for that. So, Miguel, those were some absolutely great answers. Thank you for helping and giving some insight to our community. Now, as we are wrapping up and reaching this portion of the podcast, I have one final question for you that I have to ask all my guests. If tomorrow was your last chapter in the book of life, you got hit by a bus, what philosophies or quotes of your own making would you leave to the writers and authors of the world?
Of my own making? Ooh, that's tough. Don't tell me what you're against. Tell me what you're for. There, that's it. It's don't waste time telling me what you fear. Tell me what you love. Tell me what you're for. Tell me the world that you want to build in the world. So yeah, don't tell me what you're against. Tell me what you're for.
Absolutely love that. Thank you so much, my friend. I always have to ask the philosophy of every single guest I have on here. Today has been an absolutely great conversation. I feel like I've learned so much just through some of this deep thinking of authenticity and this other side of the conversation that I don't always think about. Like, I do a lot of this stuff and inherently, but thinking of putting it through the lens of like social media and engagement and these live conventions and culture, and you framed it in a way that's very beneficial. So thank you for joining me today. It's been absolutely incredible.
Oh, thank you. And everybody, thank you. Thank you for letting me read my work, for talking about this stuff. It gets me going. So much appreciated.
Awesome. And then, so the audience, if the audience wants to know more about you, Miguel, where can they find you?
Yeah, just follow my name right there, migueleichelberger.com. And it pretty much all branches out from there. You can find me in most of the social media places. Yeah.
Awesome. And then the links to both Miguel's website and the short story, if you want to read the ending of it, will be linked down in the YouTube description as well. So definitely go check it out. All right. And Miguel, it's been awesome. Thank you again. I'm going to wrap up this bit of the podcast, but you'll have to rejoin us again in the future.
Appreciate you.
All right. Perfect. So as I look towards creative writing on the morrow, and I'm thinking about what's next, if you don't want the conversation to end and you want to learn more, the thing to watch next is the why 97% of writers fail and what you can do about it. So we did a 4-hour live stream last weekend where we dug into the 8 universal truths that I've learned from speaking with thousands of writers this past year and then boiled them down. I repackaged that as a 15-minute video so that way you can just dig into the 8 reasons with strategies to help you with writing your book. So go check out the video. It's linked down in the YouTube description down below. Definitely worth a watch. I think the highlights actually turned out really, really well. So that way you don't have to go through the whole 4-hour live stream again. Perfect. And then tomorrow. So tomorrow's going to be interesting. So Mondays is always my update day. I'm going to have some big announcements. We will have some big announcements for our live stream tomorrow. I, of course, will post I'll post the schedule probably in the early morning. If you're subscribed to the Art of Writing newsletter, you'll receive the schedule tonight. So definitely the subscription link to the Art of Writing, our Right Now community newsletter, is linked down in the YouTube description as well. So definitely if you want to get the schedule sooner, but tomorrow I'll probably go live at probably 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern with some big announcements for the channel. I'm going to finish building the map. Finally, the last thing, so I can finally start editing the second draft of my novel, but about halfway through the map making process. So I'll finish that. We got the announcements, and then I'm going to be actually joining Holly Davis on her Monday Motivation live stream afterwards. So we got like 3 or 4 hours of writing and streaming and announcements and a lot of fun stuff tomorrow. So come back, join the channel, and we will have a lot of fun. And most importantly, before you leave, don't forget, like the stream on your way out. Let us know that you got value out of this. Help us show the algorithms that writing streams are cool. All right, my friends, it's been an absolutely great stream today. I loved having all of you in it. Courtney, you were awesome. Doreen, you guys asked some great questions. J.A., I was glad to have you in the stream. Welcome to the community, my friend. I hope we get to see you in more of our live streams. Dana, again, always some sage advice. I love it. WTC, glad you were able to hop in here. And many thanks, my writing friends. We'll see you tomorrow. It's been an absolutely fun stream. And that brings us to the end of the stream. Don't forget, words are wind, but stories are forever. I'm Kauffman, and I'll catch you on the morrow. Stay creative, writers.